how did you get to be where you are? What are the prerequisite experiences, qualifications, and networks one needs to pursue or accidentally venture into to begin a career as a publicist and rise into working for a major publisher, both from the general perspective and in terms of your own individual experience?
Yes, I think the second half of that question is more the experience that I had. I think it all worked out, but I wouldn't say it was terribly premeditated. I was a lifelong reader who was really grateful for the existence of the public libraries, to be able to make that possible here in Brooklyn as an immigrant kid. I sort of ended up with an English major after trying all of the majors that I knew to have jobs attached to them and didn't quite find the love or skill level that I was looking for. And so when I graduated, I started looking for what other jobs there were that I hadn't been familiar with. And that really is how I came to publishing as an industry. And my first job, which I highly recommend because it worked for me, was in a literary agency as a sort of admin person. It was a great place to get a sense of everything from authors sending their books blindly for possible submission to watching agents take talent on, try and sell those books to publishers, watch a book go through the publishing process and into publication and meet its readers, or not as much as we might have hoped, or a young person in their first publishing job might have assumed. And so that was really where I got a sense of the industry and some of the available roles, and where I had the inkling that perhaps publicity might be a place where my personality and interest and kind of love of championing reading and writers might fit well. And so from there, after sort of working there for a year, I moved into my first job in-house as an assistant. Um, the one thing I might add, sort of looking slightly back rather than starting at the beginning in terms of skills that are required, at least for publicity, a skill that I did not have that I would recommend, or maybe not a skill, but a sort of reality, is all of the writers that I was fans of were not living. And that's fine. I would say it would have served me better to be a fan of, to be aware or more aware than zero of writers working now and what it meant to be a working writer rather than, again, more of a reader looking back. So that is something I did not have going for me, but that I would certainly recommend in hindsight and to anyone looking now.
So you mentioned that as part of a skill set that a publicist needs, an awareness, I mean, probably more than an awareness, but an almost expertise at contemporary conditions and what authors and what trends there are, literarily speaking. What completes the skill set for a publicist? What do you think a publicist needs to have in her bag?
I was quite lucky, I think, in that the first job that I had in publishing was as an assistant at Knopf. I was supporting two different publicists, both of whom were senior level, both of who worked on kind of different specialties and had a very different working style. One worked on a lot of policy, think tank, nonfiction, big titles, and one worked on a lot of arts and fiction. And one was really A type and had a lot of forms and printouts and color coding. And one had a lot of wonderful relationships and had previously worked in editorial and had a really person and literature first, what's on the page approach. And the reason I say I'm lucky is it was my first sense that there are any number of ways to do this job, which was quite a relief, both in picking up what I could from their work and then knowing that if my approach was a third version or some mix of the two, that that would probably also be okay. One thing that I look for when I've hired, for as long as that's been part of my role, and looking back, something that made a huge difference to the quality of my work and also my confidence in it, is a huge attention to detail. As much as a lot of this work is about storytelling um, and narrative and relationships and putting the best foot forward and rising to the ambition of the writer and the work, we are also running schedules and wanting to be sure that when a person arrives, they have absolutely everything. Is this a live interview? Are they on camera, or do they not need to worry about how they look? Who are they talking to? Are there going to be questions from the audience, or is this pre-recorded and they have time to say it again? Most of the time, you or the publicist is the only person to sort of be the intermediate to have a whole host of information like that is just crucial to everyone putting their best foot forward, or to arriving on time, or to being in the right spot. And as hard as it is to secure those things, which is certainly a huge part of the job, especially early on in your career, when your role is at least somewhat administrative, but then forever on, right? Because really you still remain that link between the logistics. It's not a very glamorous answer, but it makes you feel more confident to get those things right. And then that's the reputation you have. The next time you go back to that producer, editor, whoever, they know that not only are you bringing them quality, but you are also a reliable, non bumpy moment in their inbox. And so, again, I realize that's not a very exciting answer, but that's very honest, both in terms of when my work got better, and is very much something I look for when I'm working with a junior or up and coming publicists, because authors and media, everyone on all sides notices if it doesn't go well. So it's good to get it right.
Yeah, getting it right, very important. Uh, I mean, the publishing industry that you're a part of right now, I mean, the publishing has always been kind of in flux. It's always been highly responsive to various turns in the culture. But today, for whatever reason, it feels particularly volatile.
Mhm.
Um, could you speak to what you think are the best ways to adapt or kind of gain resilience in a period like now when so much is kind of uncertain? Um, Editors we've talked to have kind of have latched onto their love for a book and wanting to see it be in the world. And I'm wondering if there's kind of a similar answer from you, or like what are the things that one needs to do in a volatile market like this?
That's such an interesting question. And in part, I realized that I could almost take two doors to answer it, because it's volatile in a couple of ways. I do think in recent years, publishing in terms of itself as an industry, the number of changes at CEO levels or moving around of imprints, the kind of infrastructure in which we sit, most of publishing and work, has been in flux more than recent years. But that's also true of the media we're pitching, right? While the consolidation of local media is not a news story, it certainly hasn't slowed. And the reality that more and more newsrooms are shrinking cultural coverage, that there are more people who are freelance, that you might be pitching a person whose job used to be three different people's jobs, and now it's the book's editor and. So in a way, I think it sort of just puts your question in bold, because I could choose one of two ways to answer that. I think I will probably answer the media side of things, both because that's more relevant to sort of PR. And there's more I can say about that, because I'm not, for the rest of it, it's sort of like I wish everyone truly the best. And I hope the choices being made corporately are for the betterment of everyone who's working there and the authors they support. But in terms of with media, I I have never worked at a time where sometimes I'll hear older colleagues or mentors say, you used to be able to list these three things. And if you had those three things, then you knew you had a hit. I've been working for about 17 years. That's never been true in the time that I've been here. There's never kind of been a silver bullet. Um, Even a book club, right? Which I think right now for fiction is probably the closest thing we have to kind of like, if you have it, you're set. It's wonderful, but I wouldn't say that it is reliably delivering in that way every single time, as important and as wonderful as it is. So I think what that's meant for me, um, is that I'm always aiming for the biggest levers we do know we have. So whether that's a book club or prominent reviews, or if it's the kind of book that can get on TV, or whatever is sort of the right sort of biggest goal that you can imagine for the particular book and writer that you are, but also for quantity. So we're aiming for those biggest hits, levers that are most reliably big. And then how can we have as long a list of coverage on beneath it as we can? And there is also often where you get to be quite creative, because there is what the book is actually about. So maybe it's a nonfiction book about science, and so of course you're pitching, let's say, book editors and the science sections. But is the writer also a cook, or did they write this story in the middle of a particularly interesting personal moment, and maybe there's an essay there? Do they live in Texas? And Texas Monthly might be, right? It's sort of starting to get incredibly specific in ways that can be really fun. and that are specific enough to start to add and accrue that quantity, which on its own maybe isn't quite enough, but it's certainly still the case. I think that at times when you have enough, my hope is always to push a book or an author into so much awareness that that the feeling of like, oh well, if we haven't covered it, we're sort of like the only ones starts to creep. That is like a very exciting, a hard moment to get to. What I'm often aiming for is the feeling of, oh, everyone's mentioned this. Have we mentioned this? I feel quite proud of myself if we can get there. So